I want to talk a little rent control today. You guys going okay? You guys okay going off the
I'm
beaten path a
surprised.
little
I'm
bit?
surprised you even know about rent control. Rent control is way before your day. I mean,
Is
it
it
was in New York. Where we grew up, it was, everything was rent control, but not.
New York, California, Oregon, Massachusetts until they repealed it? I mean, I know a little something about it,
All right, let's
Tom.
do it.
I know a
Let's have a
little
little
something.
chat.
All right, let's talk. Let's start with a little background context where we find ourselves with President Biden now in the poly market has a 39% chance of clenching the Democratic nomination for the Democratic Party, which has been kind of in free fall. That was as high as 70% prior to Adam Schiff coming, 74%, I think, yesterday prior to Adam Schiff coming out and calling for him to step down. Kamala Harris at 47%. The odds, again, these are poly market odds. The odds of a Biden resignation, about 66% today. And I think the last time we talked, it was around 24%. There was a less than a 1 in 4% chance. That has gone to 2 out of 3, given the probabilities in the poly market.
I'm
Given the fact
surprised.
that
I just got to stop you for 1 second. I'm really
Go ahead.
surprised you're on poly markets. Those.
Why is that?
They're
Why
relatively
is that?
liquid. Ryan brought that up on Monday. There's like 300 million
It's
in
super
bets.
liquid. It's super liquid.
It's pretty
You're
wild.
crazy.
Like you would not have expected that, but there's a lot of cash floating around on that.
Okay. I've been talking to the guy that's the CEO of that since he was like 19 years old.
A Biden campaign that is in peril. And against that backdrop, there was an announcement. That announcement was, I think it was a White House press release yesterday, announces major new actions to lower housing costs by limiting rent increases and building more homes. I'm going to read you directly from the press release. I think there was rumors about this because President Biden had said something or mentioned something in a previous speech.
55
but in
bucks.
the press release, exactly.
They're capping
He's
at 55 bucks. I'm holding it to them.
You might be out on that one. Calling on Congress to pass legislation giving corporate landlords a choice to either cap rent increases on existing units at 5% or risk losing current valuable federal tax breaks. So under President Biden's plan, corporate landlords beginning this year and for the next 2 years would only be able to take advantage of faster depreciation write-offs available to the owners of rental housing if they keep annual rent increases to no more than 5% each year. This would apply to landlords with over 50 units in their portfolio, covering more than 20 million units across the country. A couple exceptions real quick before you get in the conversation. It would include an exception for new construction and substantial renovation or rehabilitation. The reason it's important, in 2019, I think people are going to talk about rent controls and their impact on new housing supply. So it's notable that this does not apply to new construction. That's typically the case, though, as I mentioned before. In 2019, Oregon passed a rent control, which was like inflation plus 7% in Oregon, and they also exempted new construction, I think, out for 15 years. And so I'll say a couple of things really quickly. I'm not going to steel man or straw man or pro or against before we get into the conversation. I'll just say there are a couple of low-hanging fruit reasons against this or arguments you'll hear against rent control. One being, many would argue it reduces housing supply in the long run. There are some studies that have shown it in existing markets with rent control. The second potential is you have landlords that might charge more upfront to offset diminished returns in the long run. In other words, if you're going to create new construction that doesn't apply, but let's say new construction is only up to 5 years, maybe you charge more upfront in the first 5 years, knowing that you're going to get capped after 5 years, something of that nature. There's the argument that landlords will stop making meaningful improvements to the building in order to maximize profits, given your capped upside. And the fourth, which arguably might be the most important, is that there's no means test here. So the subsidies can potentially go out to the wrong people in markets that could certainly afford 5% or more increase. So given that backdrop, Thomas Sosnoff, when I read this, I immediately thought of you, and I'm ashamed to admit that. And I know it's going to make you blush. It's going to make you feel good. But there's a reason why I thought of you, my friend, and it's because you are the ultimate believer in the God that is efficient markets. And I wondered, what would Thomas Sosnoff say about this proposal for rent control? Because on one end, it's coming from, I think, a political ideology you might side with in more cases than not. And on the other end, you are a devout believer in efficient markets. So what say you, Thomas Sosnoff, on the rent control policy that has been floated by the Biden administration at a 5% cap annually?
I like it.
You like it?
I like it. I think it's smart.
I did not think you were going to go this direction.
I was going to sell that too.
I like it. And part of the reason I like it is because I really feel like you wanted me to go in a different direction. Yeah. And
I didn't
you
want
were ranting and raving yesterday about governments, about the whole, no cap on trading for politicians.
Right. I don't think
so. Why do you want the government
there's a big
dictating?
Difference. It's not the government dictating. It's a big difference. The reason I want no cap on trading for politicians is because I think it's a very important exercise to practice what you preach.
Yeah, for our business. But
the reason I don't mind the rent control is because for everybody out there, you got to realize you can't have your cake and eat it too. There's so much hypocrisy in all the rhetoric and all the political bullshit. What they're trying to do right now, first, it's like, oh my God, look at inflation under this administration. Look at the cost of this. Look at the cost of that. And they're like, okay, well, do something about it. So then they do something about it. They go, oh my God, look at the free markets that you're disrupting. You can't have your cake and eat it too. You've got to make this is really geared towards large corporations and hedge funds that are scooping up like a lot of cheap properties. And this does not impact the Nikki Batista, you want to go out and buy a 3-flat and raise the rent. This does not affect.
I can't buy a 3-flat.
I understand, but if you wanted to go out and buy,
theoretically,
if you wanted to go out and buy a 3-flat or a 5-flat, whatever it is, and whatever it is that you want to do, they have no problem.
So why don't they just come out and say, okay, BlackRock, you can't buy single family homes?
This is a better way. This is a smarter way of doing it. This is actually a pretty smart way of doing it. And incenting. Basically incenting with the tax advantages, incenting with, listen, you're trying to address a very complex problem. And this is a well thought out plan to possibly, I haven't studied it myself. I didn't even know Victor was talking about it today. But from what I read just the first time, yeah, I'm fine with it. I mean, I don't think there's a negative side to it. I think it helps the people that you need to help. But I think I don't think it hurts, quote, the free market. I don't think it hurts the little guy from building stuff. And, everybody's out there complaining about hedge funds and large funds scooping up all the properties. And then when they actually do something about it, they're like, oh, my God, now you're messing with free markets. No, you're not. Not at all. You're not changing the landscape of real estate in any way at all. And so because the tax benefits on the other side and everything else offset it, it's a pretty fair exchange. You're just helping the consumer and you're keeping inflation in check.
I am very, very surprised. First of all, let me say this. I didn't expect you to say anything. I didn't know what you were going to say. I more or less bet on where I think you're going to go. That's number one. Number two, you didn't know I was going to talk about this because you don't read your text. But you not only
he reads them then deletes them. Okay, that's the problem. It's like gone. Once he reads it, it's gone.
He texted, just to be fair about this, he texted me the topic when we were doing the morning show. So it wasn't like I had time to prepare. But go ahead. I still want to hear what you have to say.
All right. So I'll say a couple of things. One, I was curious before I formed an opinion, and I'm not sure I'm all the way there yet, but before I formed an opinion, I wanted to know, what does 5% mean? What does it actually mean? Like, before I jump off the bridge here and say that's a bad number, what is this? I wanted to see what it was in context. And so if you look, I'm pulling out the rent of primary residence in the U.S. cities, the average of that out of the CPI. Now, you can make an argument that the CPI rent is probably one of the worst pieces of data that I could pull out.
I can't make that argument.
I could go get Zillow. I could go get something else. But the point is, we're looking at official government data. A couple things to point out. It is very rare that at the national level, you'll see price increases or rent increases greater than 5%. It almost never happens. There are periods and times like the 40s where we had very high debt levels and we had an inflationary time period. In the 70s, we had very high levels of debt. Money printing, we went off the gold standard and therefore high inflationary period. We went above 5%. We also introduced lots of price controls in those two eras. Perhaps not surprising then when you see us moving above 5% on the national average that we're having these discussions to begin with. The second thing that I noticed was we've already on a national level cooled to at or about the 5% level. So I suppose there's a question of like how much impact will this policy even have? It is something that perhaps some renters and voters will cling to and perhaps look at as a carrot to pull in some potential voters. But part of me goes, well, if we've already disinflated down to 5%, what is the actual impact? And I think the third thing, Tom, to your point, is what it can't have a negative effect. I think you said something to that level. And I guess very simply, if your market price, if your equilibrium point, this is very simple, right? But like if your market price, your equilibrium point for demand and supply is well above where your price ceiling ends up being, then you have, in theory, you'll have lower supply. And that difference, the ceiling creates a shortage. So many will argue that in the long run, that by introducing price controls, that you will actually limit the supply availability. And we're in this mess to begin with because we have low supply availability. And the third thing I would say, Tom, is it seems a bit strange to try to tell three stories at one time. And the three stories would be, I'm going to try to not be so political. I just wanted to be more factual driven. This is more opinionated. Okay. But the Biden position seems a bit tough because on one hand, you're saying we have this great economy, markets at or near all-time highs. But on the other end, you're saying that corporations are taking excessive profits. And then you're also saying that we need policies like rent controls or debt cancellations and universal basic income. It seems like if you had a strong economy that was working for all Americans, it seems like it's tough. Isn't it tough to tell all three of those stories at the same time? That you have a terrific economy, but also corporations are greedy and they're taking excess profits, and also that we need rent controls, debt cancellation, and in Dean Phillips' opinion, universal basic income. Like, isn't it tough to tell all those three stories at one time, Tom?
It's really hard. And you know what? I really appreciate politicians and administrations that actually do something. You know, what drives me crazy is, listen, every person that wants to do something is not, every idea is never going to be 100% right. What drives me more crazy is people that complain and don't shut up about things, but yet turn against and turn down everything that is proposed. If there was decent discourse and there was the ability to talk through things, then I understand, then okay, let's go out and put it on a public debate, put it on a stage. But the problem that we have in this country is that we have one side that proposes things and we have another side that hates everything and says, you know what, just turn it over to the states. And that's not any way to build policy, to legislate new things, and to govern. And that's the biggest issue we have. You can't just have one side that proposes everything and another side that says everything you just proposed is crap, but they never propose anything. They never do anything. They never propose anything or do anything. One party is a party of do nothing, and one party is a party of, okay, we'll try this. Sometimes it doesn't work. So we'll give you some fodder for having a discussion. That's the biggest issue we have. The biggest issue is not debating, the impact on the CPI, or does this impact, some hedge fund or something like that. That is not the issue here. The issue here is, we need more proposals. Like, it's the same thing like when we're building a business. We try to push the envelope as far as we can. Does everybody love it? Of course not. But if we didn't push the envelope, if we didn't push the envelope 25 years ago or 10 years ago, you know what? Half the people that trade today wouldn't be trading because that technology wouldn't have existed. Nobody would have ever done it. And everybody said when we did, they go, you're crazy. Nobody will ever do this stuff. The whole point is you need people and you need administrations and you need politicians and lawmakers that take chances, that take risks, that do things that are a little bit maybe unconventional, maybe sometimes not necessary, or maybe sometimes it's a means to an end. But you cannot advance under the party, under an ideas where let's just go back to the way it was 50 years ago. Like that's the whole difference here. I think you're aggressively getting into some of the minutiae here and some of the details, which aren't really the point. You know what? We have to support politicians and ideas and lawmakers who take risk. And that's the most important thing. And if you're trying to help the consumer, and that is really who is being targeted here to be helped, instead of, let's not worry about helping the billionaire for a change. Let's not worry about helping the large BlackRock for a change. Let's worry about helping the end consumer, the person that's got no say in this matter. And if you don't like it, fine. Okay, that's tough. That we tried. But that's the whole point here, and I think you're missing that.
I think that's totally fair. And I agree with much of what you said. The only small caveat I would say, and I don't even know if it's a caveat, which is I'm in favor of the same person and championing the same person you are. And if favoring the politician who's willing to take risks actually leaves that individual in a less powerful position in 2, 5, or 10 years, or their community in a less powerful position in 10, 5, or 2 years, then I think it's worth the getting into the minutia to try to have, to sharpen up these ideas and come up with better policies that will actually improve the problem, not just be a notch in some politician's belt, but actually improve the problem for working Americans.
I agree. I just remember, and because you know this, just remember, it's always those who are most with the revolutionary ideas that are always turn out to be the heroes and the status quo of the future. And it's and that is the way. That's why this country is so great. And so let's stop supporting and endorsing all those people that want to take us backwards.
By the way, I'm not supporting or endorsing anybody. I want to talk about ideas and policies.
I know you do, but you're sitting there. Thankful. You were sitting there worried about BlackRock for some reason.
No,
and you're sitting worried.
No, I'm not.
Blackstone, BlackRock, whoever owns let's stop worrying about. They're going to be okay.
What I want to do is be thankful to you for allowing me the platform to actually talk about the policy instead of the people, and I'm appreciative for that.